During a family dinner, my husband said he'd always wished he married my best friend. Devastated, I confronted him, and he tried to justify it, so I packed my bags and left. 2 months later, he came crawling back, expecting me to forget his betrayal. It was a typical Sunday evening, the kind of evening where everything seemed to slow down, and the mundane rhythm of life felt comforting. The table was set with my favorite blue plates, the ones I'd inherited from my grandmother, and the delicious aroma of roast chicken and garlic mashed potatoes filled the air. My husband, Mark, was at the head of the table, his dark hair tousled in that effortless way that I loved, and his deep voice was punctuating the comfortable chatter that surrounded us. I smiled across the table at Sarah, my best friend since childhood, who had come over for dinner. She was sitting next to Mark, as usual. Sarah had been part of our lives for as long as I could remember, since the days of sleepovers and late-night talks about boys and dreams of the future. We had a bond that felt unbreakable, or so I thought. The conversation flowed naturally. We laughed about old memories, shared the occasional awkward silence, and traded jabs about the latest gossip in our small town. But then, just as I was about to serve the salad, Mark dropped the bombshell that would shatter everything I thought I knew about our marriage. "You know," he said casually, his voice lowering, "I've always wished I'd married Sarah." My heart skipped a beat, and the room seemed to freeze. My fingers tightened around the serving spoon, and I felt the blood drain from my face. At first, I thought I had misheard him. I turned to Sarah, who was now staring at her lap, her face pale, avoiding my gaze. "What?" I whispered, the word barely escaping my throat. Mark, oblivious to the growing tension in the room, shrugged. "I just think things would have been different, you know? She's always been so easygoing. So much more fun. You're different." I could feel the weight of his words crushing me, the sting of his betrayal seeping into my chest. It wasn't the first time he'd mentioned how much he admired Sarah. She was beautiful, carefree, everything I wasn't, but to hear him say he wished he'd married her, it was a blow I wasn't prepared for. "Mark, are you serious right now?" I managed to say, my voice trembling. He looked at me, confusion flickering in his eyes, as if he didn't understand why I was so upset. "It's not a big deal, Liz. I mean, we're married, and I love you. But I've always wondered, you know? What if things had been different?" I stood there, frozen, my mind racing. How long had he been thinking this? Had he ever truly loved me, or was I just the safe choice, the woman he'd married because it was convenient? And Sarah, my best friend, how long had she known about his feelings? How much had she hidden from me? "Are you saying that you regret marrying me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark's eyes softened, but there was no real remorse in his gaze. "No, it's not like that. I don't regret it. But sometimes, you wonder about the what-ifs. It's just a thought." I could feel my world crumbling. The foundation of our marriage, everything I thought we had built together, seemed to unravel with every word he spoke. And Sarah, oh, Sarah. She wasn't even looking at me now. She was staring at her plate, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't even try to defend herself, to say anything to ease the growing tension between us. "You're not even going to say anything?" I turned to her, my voice sharp with hurt. "You've known about this, haven't you?" She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes flicking up to meet mine, but she didn't say anything. Her silence spoke volumes. The tears that had been welling up in my eyes finally spilled over. "I can't believe this," I whispered, shaking my head. "I can't believe you would say something like that, especially in front of her, Mark. How long have you been harboring this?" "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said, his voice softening, but there was no real apology in it. "It's just something I've been thinking about. I never acted on it. But you've been thinking about it. You've been fantasizing about what life would be like if you had married her, haven't you?" He didn't answer, but the way he looked at me, like I was overreacting, made it clear. He had. Liz, Sarah finally spoke, her voice tentative. It's not like that. He's just. Just what? I interrupted, my voice breaking. Just expressing his feelings? Just being honest? You're both so casual about this betrayal, it's like you don't even see what's wrong with it. I could feel the rage building up inside me, hot and uncontrollable. You think I'm just supposed to sit here and accept this, don't you? That I'm supposed to forgive him and act like nothing's happened? Mark stood up, walking over to me, his hands outstretched in an attempt to calm me down. Liz, please. Don't make a scene. It's not like that. I love you. I'm just. Just what? I spat, taking a step back from him. Just regretting marrying me, just wishing you had married my best friend instead? The words hung in the air, and I felt my entire world shatter into 1,000 pieces. The dinner, the laughter, the years we'd spent together, all of it felt meaningless now. I turned and walked toward the bedroom, my mind a whirlwind of anger, hurt, and betrayal. I packed my bags in a daze, throwing clothes into my suitcase without thinking. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't be with someone who wished he had married someone else. I couldn't be with someone who thought so little of me. When I came back into the living room, Mark was sitting on the couch, his face a mask of confusion and regret. Liz, please, he said softly, don't leave. I didn't mean to hurt you. I can't stay, I said, my voice steady, despite the tears streaming down my face. I can't stay with someone who doesn't love me the way I deserve. I'm not going to beg for your love, Mark. If you've always wished you married Sarah, then maybe it's time you try that. I left without another word, slamming the door behind me, and drove to my parents' house. I needed space, time to breathe, time to process the betrayal. The pain in my chest was overwhelming, but I knew I couldn't go back to him. Not now, not after everything he'd said. 2 months later. The first few weeks without Mark were a blur. I stayed with my parents, sorting through the wreckage of my marriage, and leaning on Sarah for support, even though I could barely look at her without feeling nauseous. How could I have been so blind? How could I have missed the signs that something was wrong? My mind kept replaying that dinner over and over. His words. His tone. The way Sarah sat there, quietly complicit in his confession, offering no defense. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear Mark's voice, casual and cold, as he admitted his deepest regret. It was like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. I thought about confronting Sarah, demanding to know the full extent of their relationship, but I couldn't bring myself to. The thought of losing her too was too much to bear. But the silence between us grew louder with each passing day. Every time I saw her name on my phone, I hesitated. Should I answer? Should I confront her? I couldn't decide. Then, one evening, I received a message from Mark. Liz, I miss you. I've made a huge mistake. Please, can we talk? I'm sorry for everything. I never should have said what I did. My heart twisted in my chest. I hadn't expected him to come crawling back, but there he was, begging for forgiveness. He didn't deserve my forgiveness. He didn't deserve me. But as the days passed, the loneliness crept in. I missed the companionship, the life we'd built together. I wondered if I was making a mistake by not talking to him, by not even giving him the chance to explain. Then, one night, after I had finally gathered the strength to move on, he showed up at my door. Liz, he said, his voice desperate. I know I hurt you. I know I messed up, but I can't live without you. Please, just forgive me. I've been miserable without you. I looked at him, standing there, his eyes pleading, his face worn with regret. He was the man I had loved for years, but in that moment, I saw him for what he was, selfish, cowardly, and full of excuses. I don't know what you want from me, Mark, I said, my voice cold. You betrayed me. You told me you wished you married someone else. I can't just forget that. I can't just forgive you and pretend like everything is okay. I was stupid, he said, his voice breaking. Please, Liz. I'll do anything to make it right. I've realized how much you mean to me. I stared at him for a long moment, weighing my options. The truth was, I wasn't sure if I could ever trust him again. I'm sorry, Mark, I said, shaking my head. But you can't expect me to forget what you said. I can't live in a marriage where I'm constantly wondering if I'm second choice. With that, I closed the door, finally letting go of the past. The months that followed were the hardest of my life, but they were also the most freeing. I learned to find my own strength, to love myself in ways I had never thought possible. Mark tried to reach out a few more times, but I never responded. I had made my decision. And in the end, I realized something important: no one, no matter how much they begged, deserved to have someone who didn't choose them wholeheartedly. I was enough, just as I was. And I wasn't about to let anyone make me feel less than that again.